Well, Snyder fans, is Rebel Moon good or is it not? It's a complicated question. So, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, is the first part of a multi-part story that Zack Snyder is trying to tell with Netflix. This movie is releasing in theaters on December 21st, or it's already out in select theaters, but it's going on Netflix on December 21st. The movie itself has so much potential. It has so much good, but it has so much also just maddeningly frustrating elements of it as well. Zack Snyder is... I like Zack Snyder's movies. I like his DC movies. I like his movies he made before the DC stuff. I think Watchmen is one of the best comic adaptations of all time. But this movie felt like it could have used a little more editing. It could have used a little more touch-up. And it feels like, even though there is a director's cut coming out, it doesn't need a director's cut. It needs less and not more. The movie comes in at about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so, and it really feels like as you're watching it that it needed to get cut down by about 15 minutes. And that's not because there's parts of it that are just like, why is this here? It's more so that the scenes drag on for about a minute or two more than they need to. And that comes into effect a lot outside of the action scenes. There's a lot of exposition. There's a lot of explaining things about the story. It stars Sofia Boutella as Cora. It stars Charlie Hunnam as Kai. It stars Anthony Hopkins as Jimmy, or at least Anthony Hopkins' voice. It also stars Ed Skrein as the big bad Admiral Atticus Noble. It stars Jaimon Hunsu as General Titus. It also stars Michael Heisman as Gunner, and Ray Fisher is also in the film as another character. There's other actors in it, but it basically follows along. If you've seen Seven Samurai, The Magnificent Seven, Star Wars, or other sort of science fiction stuff, Warhammer 40K, if you've played that game, it does assemble a lot of the stuff from those movies, Battle Beyond the Stars, stuff like. It feels like a science fiction movie that you've watched before, but not so much so in a way that it's copying stuff, but in its just that science fiction is sort of derivative of a lot of stuff out there. The story here is complicated and not... It doesn't follow that Star Wars, Luke Skywalker person on like a desert planet that nobody goes to, but it follows Cora, who is a former soldier of the Mother Realm, the Realm, or whatever you want to call it, basically the evil empire here. And she's a former soldier. She goes to this farming colony and chooses to live out the rest of her days there. Everything's hunky-dory, happy, until the Mother Realm shows up because one of the members of the community has started selling their excess grain to the resistance, to the rebels, and so they want to get their grain for the armies of the Mother Realm and all of that. And then basically they take over the town, and Cora is forced to go off-world to go find warriors and fighters and people to fight off the Mother Realm forces that are taking over her town. It's very simple in that way. It feels small, but it expands out to this bigger, wide universe of planets and people and aliens and all of that. Visually, the movie is stunning. It knows its style. It knows everything that it wants to be. Zack Snyder is a very visually driven filmmaker here, and that's a lot is on display here in Rebel Moon. It's a beautiful movie. The performances here are pretty good. Jaimon Hunsu, of the sort of 7 side characters that we gets the most to work with his character, which is a lot of the other characters are kind of just there. And it really feels like they're there to sell an action figure or something like that. Ray Fisher's character is a sibling of one of the 2 resistance leaders. He joins them in their fight. Charlie Hunnam sort of plays the, smuggler, scoundrel, like kind of guy that's a little morally gray. And then there's some other characters that get a little bit to work with, but you really focused here on Cora and Sofia Boutella's performance. So if you're wondering, what is bad about Rebel Moon? Because the movie itself, it looks stunning, it's beautiful, the story is pretty fun, the action scenes are pretty good. Here's what ruins Rebel Moon for me, and it doesn't ruin it necessarily, but it really drags down what could have been a great science fiction action film, is the goddamn slow motion. I know Zack Snyder is known for having slow motion in his films, but it's so overused here in every action scene. Slow motion is designed to accentuate things that you want the audience to see. You want to see how they act in combat, and you want to see the visuals around this sort of fight scene that's going on. And you get that in certain moments here, especially in the third act. It works better than other times. But throughout the film, Every single action scene has slow motion, and it just overuses it to a point where you see it happening and you're going, oh my god, he's doing it again. And it's just not necessary. It drags down the action in certain points where you're going, this didn't need to be in slow motion. It looks cool, but it takes you out of it as an audience, and it never puts you back in because it keeps going back to the well of slow motion. The other thing about Rebel Moon that's already part of a bigger problem in movies these days is the dialogue at points is inaudible. You cannot hear what the characters are saying at some points in this movie, and it's maddening because there's important points of exposition that are lost. They are lost unless you are sitting there with a cup to the speaker trying to hear them. There's a point where at the end of the film that explains, hey, why does the evil empire not come and just smoke this friggin' farming community from orbit? Oh, well, here we're going to explain why, because they're cowards and they do all of this. But you can't hear it in the movie because the audio, the dialogue mix is so low compared to the rest of it. The sound mixing and the sound design in this film outside of the dialogue is awesome. You hear every thud, every explosion, every punch, every kick, every shot. You hear it. And so it makes no sense why they would put so much effort into the sound mixing of the actual effects, but not the sound mixing of the dialogue. It's so frustrating because I really wanted to like this movie going into it. I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. It's a cool concept. Let's do sort of Zack Snyder's version of Star Wars of the hero's journey myth. And it does that, and it does stuff that's really interesting that takes away from that, and it doesn't follow the Star Wars story that Joseph Campbell, Hero with a Thousand Faces, to a T. That's interesting about Rebel Moon, but the other stuff that's just maddening about it that takes away from it, the characters sometimes are one note, the sound mixing is terrible for the dialogue, and the slow motion takes you out of every action scene. Cora is designed from the ground up to be this badass character that you want to root for, and in her first scene where you're showing her off, the action that she's supposed to show and like, oh, she's a badass, we thought she was just a farmer, is muted because they slow it down to a crawl, a snail's pace, when you should be showing in full motion that she can kick some ass. And that at the heart of Rebel Moon, and the fact that the movie needed a bit of a trim, at least 15 minutes, because every scene seems to go over time here. It's a good movie that could have been great. So when you consider it all with Rebel Moon, and you consider all of the things that go into it, and the fact that there is a sequel coming out next year, that Netflix wants this to be their version of Star Wars, this is a very, very flat landing for a movie that they have such high hopes for. I have high hopes for it, but at the end, it's just a good movie. It's a C+, it's a whatever that could have been something better if they reined in Zack Snyder and some of the stuff that he does in his movies. If you want to see Rebel Moon Part 1 of Child of Fire for yourself, you can check it out on Netflix. You can check it out in select theaters. See for yourself. See if you enjoy it. But for me, it's just frustrating that this could have been better. So if you like this review and you want to see more movie reviews, you can see my whole playlist right here. I've done plenty of movie reviews this year, so you can check them all out right here.